Hey guys, it's Jasper, and today I want to talk about 3 books, that's right, 3, which have helped me with the book that I am currently writing and would qualify as source material or something like that. Cha-cha-cha-cha. Now before I get too far into this video, it is worth saying there are obviously more than 3 books which I have used as source material. I have a huge stack, shelves of books which I've been using as source material. There's also lots of books that I don't have that have done that, and I don't have it because it's on my local library, because the library is a great resource to use, guys. So today I thought it'd be fun to highlight 3 books which have been important for my novel, and books that if you are writing or studying in the area of fairy tales or mythology, books that could possibly be good for you to check out. So the first book I want to talk about is Marshall McLuhan's Understanding Media. Now, if you've read this book before, bravo for you. I did not come across this book until 2.5, maybe 3 years ago. It was a book that was suggested when I was working on applications for my PhD. It was suggested by a potential professor, and I'm so glad that she suggested this book, because had I seen it in the library, I would have been like, media? That's not at all what I'm interested in. What is this? Is this a computer book? Doesn't it kind of look like a computer book? Like a computer textbook. But no, it's a fantastic book of philosophy. In this work, McLuhan breaks down and challenges concepts around communication. Communication, which is the very basis of art and all of the things we do. And McLuhan's book is just fantastic for breaking down things around myth, literature, spoken word. It's just incredibly interesting, and as a storyteller, I think is a crucial work to look at. Now, I'd like to share a little bit from McLuhan's work, and before I do that, I'd like to just show you a little bit of his work. This is a good way to know if I like a book and it's challenging. This is how you'll know if you borrow it from me. This is my madness. This is what I do. I have to break down the information, draw some pictures, and figure it out. It actually starts with a quote from Robert Browning. "A man's reach must exceed his grasp of what's a metaphor." End quote. All media are active metaphors in the power to translate experience into new forms. The spoken word was the first technology by which man was able to let go of his environment in order to grasp it in a new way. Words are a kind of information retrieval that can range over the total environment and experience at high speed. Words are a complex system of metaphors and symbols that translate experience into our uttered and outered senses. They are a technology of explicitness. By means of translation of immediate sense experience into vocal symbols, the entire world can be evoked and retrieved at any instant. Now, if that sounded a little bit confusing, then you're sitting where I was sitting when I started reading this book. And I was like, what's happening? I want to know. I'm interested. Some of those words caught my attention, but I didn't quite get it. Then you can draw in your book like I did. Or if you get it from a library, don't draw in the book, because that's not allowed. And if it didn't sound confusing, then congrats, you're Marshall McLuhan. Long story short, Marshall McLuhan's book has been important both for my academic research concerning mythology and fairy tales, as well as my own novel looking at mythology and how we translate myth, how we translate experience into word. The next book I may have already talked about, and I'm not quite certain. This is a book that I may have already talked about and I'm not quite certain because I talk about this book all the time. If you are a student of fairy tales, or you're interested in fairy tales, or you are writing a fairy tale, then Bruno Bettelmann's book, The Uses of Enchantment, The Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales, is an essential read. I picked this book up for a conference, which I spoke at a few years ago. I was gonna say last year, but I think it was maybe 2 years ago now. And I couldn't believe I hadn't read it before. Bettelmann's book is essentially what his title says. It is a discussion of the meaning and importance of fairy tales. Bruno Bettelmann wrote this book in the 1970s when he himself was in his 70s. He wrote this at the end of his career as a child psychologist and wrote this book at a time where in the 70s fairy tales were largely being critiqued for their problems, and a lot of revisionist fairy tale stuff was happening, which can be important, but what was great about Bettelmann's work is that it really contrasted what was coming out at the time, and in a period of time that was really turbulent for fairy tales, where fairy tales were being questioned and remade and tossed out the window and that sort of thing. Bettelmann was saying, wait, I understand that you have problems, and that's fine, you talk about your problems, but fairy tales have value and importance, and this is what I think on it. One of the very important things that Bettelmann says in his work is that children use fairy tales to role play their fears and anxieties. Bettelmann believed that fairy tales weren't responsible for making children anxious. He said children are anxious. Children will invent a room of monsters, and what you need to do is find a way to help the children to defeat that room of monsters. I'd like to read just a small thing from his work, and it's actually in his introduction. He begins by saying, "If we hope to live, not just from moment to moment, but in true consciousness of our existence, then our greatest need and most difficult achievement is to find meaning in our lives. To find deeper meaning, one must become able to transcend the narrow confines of a self-centered existence and believe that one will make a significant contribution to life, if not right now, then at some future time." So if you are interested in fairy tales at all, writing in fairy tales, studying fairy tales, talking about fairy tales, whether you think they're valuable or not, Bettelmann's work is an essential one to take a look at and to see if you agree, disagree, what can you take away that's good. And the last book I'd like to talk about is Sarah Maitland's Gossip in the Forest. Did I get that right? Maitland? I don't know. This is a book that I picked up, you know what, I shouldn't do this guessing game. I don't know, 2 years ago, I don't know, a year ago, I don't know, a few months ago. Not a few months ago. It's been at least a year that this book has been in my household and read by me and reread. Essentially, this book is a catalog of Maitland's journey through Britain's forests that she accompanies with fairy stories. So she travels from forest to forest, and for each forest and its specific ecology, she pairs a fairy story and talks about why forests are important, why forests are central themes in our fairy tales. And by our fairy tales, she really relies a lot on Brothers Grimm fairy tales. The fairy stories teach us how to see the forest and how to love them too. They are spooky but special in our imaginations. Woods are part of our fantasy of childhood because of the fairy stories. Our almost hidden and often bizarrely ignorant love for wildwood comes from fairy stories and keeps the forest safe. In this book, I want to see forests and fairy stories like this, partners necessary to one another, and at risk if either fails or cannot find and connect with the other. For me, this book was a wonderful read because the forests have always been a very special place, and in my book, the forest plays a large role. So Maitland's conversations around the forest was very, very interesting. If you are interested at all in forests, fairy tales, eco-criticism, ecofeminism, then check out this book. I would love to hear from you guys. What source books or books are you currently taking reference from? Or what books have been helpful for your current research or novel writing? Next week, I will continue to talk about how my second draft is going and how I'm doing in my 6-part plan or 7-part plan. I think it's a 6-part plan, but right now, I cannot be sure. As always, guys, let's be a community of writers that help each other out. Cheers, and pretend there's a coffee mug in my hand. Go, cheers! Also, if you're interested in examining spoken oral word, so it is a